The Forgotten Invitation. The sun had barely risen over the skyline of San Francisco when a sleek black car pulled up in front of the Golden Summit Tower, one of the most exclusive buildings in the country. It was the annual Visionaries and Billionaires Summit, an invitation-only event where the world's most powerful CEOs, inventors, and investors gathered to shape the future of global business. The event wasn't just about money, it was about influence, innovation, and ego. Inside the building, the atmosphere buzzed with quiet competition. Sharp suits, diamond watches, whispered deals worth billions. Every attendee was someone with power, someone who belonged. But as the morning progressed, one man's presence, or rather his unexpected arrival, would challenge everything these elites thought they knew. That man was Keanu Reeves. He walked into the marble lobby, wearing a simple black hoodie, worn jeans and old sneakers. No entourage, no press, no assistant trailing behind. He held a folded invitation in his hand, the corners creased as though it had been carried in his pocket for weeks. The security guard at the desk gave him a puzzled look, glancing between the paper and the man. "Sir, are you lost?" Keanu smiled softly. "No, just late." The guard scanned the invite and hesitated. The system recognized it. It was genuine. But something didn't make sense. This wasn't the kind of man who attended these gatherings. The guest list included venture capitalists, tech giants, and oil tycoons. Keanu Reeves didn't fit. Not here. Still, the guard waved him through. Upstairs in the Golden Chamber, an enormous room shaped like a circular library with glass walls and robotic waiters, every seat was filled with someone who had changed the world in some way. At the center of the room, a panel discussion had just begun. 5 of the world's richest men sat behind a gold-trimmed table, discussing artificial intelligence and future control of the digital economy. One of them, a sharp-jawed billionaire named Hunter Grayson, leaned into his mic and smirked. "It's simple. Emotions are inefficient. Machines will lead because they don't hesitate. They don't love. They don't forgive." A few heads nodded. Others sipped expensive coffee, pretending to agree. Just then, the doors at the back creaked open. Keanu stepped inside. No fanfare. No announcement. Silence spread like a wave. Eyes turned. Brows furrowed. Some recognized him. Others didn't. Hunter glanced up, confused. "Who let this guy in?" A woman at the far side whispered to her neighbor. "He's an actor, right? What's he doing here?" Keanu didn't respond. He walked to the back row and sat down quietly. His presence didn't belong, and yet it shifted the energy in the room like a stone tossed into still water. The panel continued, but the tone changed. Words felt forced. No one knew what to make of him. At the next break, a billionaire hedge fund manager approached him with a smirk. "I loved your movies," he said, not bothering to hide his sarcasm. "But this isn't Hollywood. This summit is for innovators and thinkers." Keanu nodded politely. "I figured. So, why are you here?" Keanu looked at the man's Rolex, then his overly polished shoes. "Because sometimes people who talk the most about the future have forgotten what really matters." The man raised a brow. "And what's that?" "People," Keanu said. "Not profits, not control, just people." The billionaire chuckled and walked away, shaking his head. But Keanu's words lingered, not loud, not dramatic, just calm and unsettling. Later that afternoon, the organizers gathered backstage. There had been a scheduling mishap. One of the keynote speakers had canceled last minute. They needed someone to fill the slot, someone compelling. An intern pulled out a forgotten list and pointed at Keanu's name. He was actually invited months ago by Mr. Shanti before he passed away. The room fell silent. Mr. Shanti, the founder of the summit, had died a year ago. He had always been different. Visionary, kind, human. And he had invited Keanu. With no better option, the organizers agreed. They handed Keanu a microphone and asked if he would be willing to speak. He looked surprised. "Me? Yes. It's your slot now." He hesitated, then nodded. An hour later, Keanu Reeves stood on the main stage under a soft spotlight. The room of billionaires stared at him, arms folded, expression skeptical. He cleared his throat. "I'm not here to impress you," he began. "I'm here because someone believed kindness belongs in rooms like this." And with that, the real story began. The story they never expected to hear, as Keanu Reeves stepped onto the stage. The weight of hundreds of calculating eyes pressed against him. Behind those stares were towering egos wrapped in fine silk ties and embroidered pocket squares. They were men and women who had shaped markets, launched empires, toppled competitors. They were used to hearing from those like themselves, sharp-tongued CEOs, cold analysts, and futurists with sleek slides full of predictions. What they weren't ready for was a man who had walked in alone, wearing worn shoes, speaking not with arrogance but quiet truth. Keanu took a deep breath. The silence was so complete that even the faint hum of the room's central cooling system could be heard. "I don't have charts," he began, his voice soft but steady. "And I don't have numbers that will impress you. I wasn't raised in rooms like this. I didn't come from money. My first acting paycheck went to pay hospital bills, not stocks. I've been broke. I've been alone. I've watched people I love disappear overnight, and through it all, I learned something strange." He paused. No one interrupted. Success doesn't change a person. It reveals them. A few eyebrows lifted. A woman in the front row tilted her head, intrigued. "I've met people," he continued, "who built billion-dollar companies and cried in hotel rooms because they didn't know how to be loved. I've seen drivers, janitors, grips on movie sets treat others with more grace than some men with entire cities in their portfolios." He glanced around the room. "You all know how to build. But what are you building for? More zeros? More control? When's the last time you built something that made someone feel safe, heard, human?" The words landed like a quiet storm. Not flashy, not rehearsed, just honest. And for the first time that day, no one reached for their phone. No one checked their smartwatch. Even Hunter Grayson, who had laughed earlier, now leaned forward just slightly. "A man I loved once told me," Keanu said, his voice dipping low, "that real wealth is measured by how gently you walk through the world." I didn't understand it back then. I do now. Because one day, all of this, your titles, your numbers, your tweets, will vanish. And what will remain is how you made others feel. That's your real legacy, not your company's, your character. In the back, a young tech founder whispered to his colleague, "This isn't what I expected, but I needed to hear it." Keanu stepped down from the stage, but not before saying one last thing. "You've all built futures for machines. Now try building one for people." As he walked back to his seat, the applause began slowly, hesitant at first. Then it grew, not from obligation, but from something deeper, something real. It wasn't loud like when a stock soars. It was warm, almost grateful. Later, in the hallway near the espresso bar, a software billionaire named Jared Langley stopped Keanu. "You said something about character," Jared said, "but that's not what gets you ahead in this world." Keanu looked at him for a moment, then smiled gently. "You're right," he replied. "Character won't get you ahead in the world you've built, but it might just save the world you're forgetting to build." And he walked away. Jared stood there holding his cup of coffee, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. Because deep down, he knew what Keanu said was true. He had forgotten why he started. He had forgotten his father's calloused hands, his mother's borrowed shoes, the nights he spent coding in a garage just to make people's lives easier. Somewhere along the path to billions, he had traded meaning for margin. And now this man, this quiet, uninvited speaker, had reminded him of who he used to be. Throughout the rest of the day, the summit felt different. The conversations at the table shifted from mergers to memories, from quarterly projections to personal regrets. People shared stories, real ones, about loss, about hope, about the things they were afraid to admit they missed. One woman, Lena Cho, founder of a global biotech empire, found herself sitting alone at the rooftop garden, tears in her eyes. She thought about her sister who died before Lena made it big. She hadn't visited her grave in years. She had always said she was too busy. But now, she knew she would go. Because Keanu's words haunted her in the best way possible, by evening, a quiet buzz spread through the summit. Not the usual headlines or trending hashtags, something softer, more powerful. Did you hear what Keanu said? Yeah, I can't stop thinking about it. I called my mom, first time in months. I pulled out my old notebook, the one with my real ideas. Keanu didn't attend the closing party. He slipped out early. No fanfare, no photos. Just, as silently as he had entered, he disappeared. But he left behind something no algorithm could calculate. A shift. And for some, that shift was the beginning of everything they never knew they needed. The mirror. No one asked for the next morning. Golden Summit Tower was quieter than usual. The elevators still chimed softly, the coffee machine still whirred with imported beans, and the staff still floated silently like shadows in tailored uniforms. But something felt off. Or maybe the right word was different. The summit's second day, traditionally known for its biggest power panels and pitch sessions, now bore the invisible imprint of a single man's voice. A man who wasn't trying to impress, sell, or dominate, but simply remind. Keanu Reeves hadn't returned to the building. No one had seen him since his quiet exit the night before. But his words hadn't left. In the marble hallway near the Innovation exhibit, 3 top venture capitalists stood in silence, each staring at a large touchscreen displaying AI growth projections. None of them said what they were thinking, but all 3 were recalling that single line. Character won't get you ahead in the world you've built, but it might just save the world you're forgetting to build. Those words had pierced through, their defenses like a slow-moving but relentless wave. Not because they were spoken by a movie star, but because they were true. And no one else had dared say it out loud. In a separate corner room, Hunter Grayson sat in a deep leather chair, staring at a blank notepad. He hadn't written a single word since Keanu's talk. It bothered him in ways he didn't want to admit. Hunter had always believed in one thing: dominance. That life was about climbing, crushing, winning. His portfolio was a reflection of this belief. Companies that mined data, gamified attention, and maximized addiction. He didn't build to inspire. He built to extract. But now, for the first time, he felt exposed. Not by scandal or failure, but by something far more disarming. A mirror held up by a stranger. A mirror that showed him not as a genius, but as a man who had once loved music, once cared about people, and somewhere along the line stopped. His assistant knocked gently on the door. "Sir, panel starts in 20 minutes. Hunter didn't move. He simply said, "Cancel it. I need time." Outside, the summit's guests continued their schedule, but their conversations had shifted. One young founder named Simon, who had just raised $40 million in seed capital, sat across from a gray-haired professor at the wellness pavilion. Instead of pitching his app, Simon asked about the professor's early research in trauma therapy. "I just realized," Simon admitted, "my product doesn't heal. It distracts, and that's not what I wanted." The professor nodded. Distraction pays. Healing saves. Back in the main ballroom, Lena Cho stood before a small audience, presenting a case study on ethical biotech. It wasn't what she'd planned. Originally, she was going to unveil a new nanotech platform that could reshape the pharmaceutical supply chain. But that morning, she rewrote her slides. Now she was speaking about a forgotten case, her first patient trial, a little girl named Maya who suffered from a rare disorder. Lena had promised Maya a cure, and for a time it worked. But the company moved on. Profits required scale. And Maya, she was lost in the numbers. "I never told this story publicly," Lena said, her voice shaking. "But I think maybe I should have. Maybe we all should." After her talk, there was no applause. Not because it wasn't powerful, but because the room was stunned. Not by technology, but by truth. Meanwhile, Keanu sat alone in a small cafe a few blocks away. He watched through the window as a father helped his daughter tie her shoe on the sidewalk. He smiled softly. No one in the cafe recognized him. He liked it that way. The barista brought him a refill and asked, "You in town for that summit thing?" Keanu nodded. "Those guys all talk about saving the world. You think they mean it?" He stirred his coffee slowly and replied, "I think some forgot they were human before they became gods." The barista blinked. "That's heavy." Keanu smiled. Truth usually is. Back at the summit, a surprise was brewing. The board of the event, composed of elite founders and CEOs, had voted to offer Keanu the closing keynote. It had never been done before, giving the final address to someone outside the traditional power circle. But the motion passed, quietly and unanimously. Even Hunter Grayson voted yes. That evening, a private car was sent to retrieve Keanu. He didn't ask for it, didn't expect it. But he accepted. When he arrived at the tower again, the staff greeted him differently. Not as a celebrity, but as something else. Perhaps a messenger, or maybe a mirror, the kind few dared look into. Before he went on stage, one of the event planners approached him nervously. "Mr. Reeves, are you ready?" He looked at her kindly. "Are they?" When he stepped onto the stage for the final time, the lights were dimmer than before. The crowd was larger. Not just attendees, but staff, interns, and even drivers had snuck into the back rows. Everyone wanted to hear him again, not for fame, but for feeling. He looked at the crowd for a long moment before speaking. "Yesterday I told you a story. Today I want to ask you a question." The room leaned in. "If the world lost everything you built, but still had your kindness, your honesty, your grace, would it be enough?" You could hear the air leave lungs across the room. No one had an easy answer. But for the first time at Golden Summit, the people in that room weren't measuring worth by bank accounts. They were measuring by heart. The empire of silence, the night had fallen quietly over Golden Summit Tower, yet inside the walls, something loud had awakened, not in sound, but in soul. The room still echoed with Keanu's final words from the stage. "If the world lost everything you built, but still had your kindness, your honesty, your grace, would it be enough?" It was more than a question. It was a quiet bomb, detonated, at the core of every ego in that building. For hours afterward, no one seemed in a hurry to leave. Billionaires who were usually chauffeured off the moment a keynote ended, now lingered like students after a life-altering lecture. In corners and corridors, conversations changed shape. No one was boasting about acquisitions or talking about the next big pitch. Instead, people shared regrets, memories, wounds they had hidden under layers of status. Hunter Grayson sat alone at a marble bar that overlooked the city skyline. He nursed a drink he hadn't touched, his mind lost in a world he'd long ignored, his childhood. He remembered a woman who used to sit by his bed and read him stories. His mother, a nurse who never finished college but who believed in kindness like it was a currency. She used to say, "You can't take a mansion into heaven, baby, but you can take how you made people feel." He had laughed at her then. Now those words hurt more than any loss he'd ever faced. He pulled out his phone and opened an old voicemail. It was the last message his mother ever sent him before she passed. He'd never listened to it, he was too busy. But tonight he pressed play. "Hey, sweetheart." Her voice came through, shaky but sweet. "I know you're busy running the world. Just wanted to say I love you. Always. No matter what." Hunter pressed the phone to his heart and closed his eyes. A billionaire. Alone, broken, beginning again. Meanwhile, in the garden outside the venue, Lena Cho walked slowly beneath a canopy of fairy lights strung across the trees. She held a photo in her hand, a printout of Maya, the little girl whose trial had once meant everything. Lena had found the photo in an old email from years ago. In it, Maya's smile was so bright it seemed to light up the entire paper. Lena hadn't cried in years, not at losses, not at celebrations. But now tears slid down her face freely. "I forgot you," she whispered to the photo. "I'm so sorry." Beside her, a quiet voice spoke. "But you remembered now. And that matters, more than you know." She turned. It was Keanu. She wiped her eyes and gave a trembling laugh. "You have a strange way of making powerful people feel small." He shook his head. "Not small. Just human." They sat together on a bench beneath the stars, sharing silence. Not the empty kind, but the full kind, the kind that holds everything words can't. Inside Simon, the young founder, had gathered a group of other entrepreneurs. Instead of pitching ideas for money, they each stood up and spoke about what truly inspired them. One man talked about growing up in foster care and building an app to help kids find mentors. A woman spoke about designing a wearable device for people with early-stage dementia, inspired by her father. The group began scribbling plans, not to raise funds but to build a fund. One that didn't chase profit first, but purpose. We should call it the Reeves Initiative, Simon joked. Everyone laughed, but deep down, they meant it. As the night deepened, Keanu stood on the edge of the rooftop, gazing out over the glittering city. A man approached him, tall, broad-shouldered, with the quiet confidence of someone used to making people nervous. His name was Miles Drexler, owner of an aerospace empire and whispered to be worth more than nations. You know, Miles said, standing beside him, I've been to every one of these summits. This is the first time I've seen people actually listen. Keanu looked over, expression calm. Maybe it's because for once no one's trying to sell anything. You didn't ask for anything, Miles admitted. You didn't want power, money, recognition. You just spoke. Keanu nodded. Sometimes that's all people need. To be spoken to, not sold to. Miles looked out into the dark sky where satellites blinked like distant thoughts. I build rockets. We're aiming for Mars next year. Keanu's voice was soft. Just make sure we don't lose ourselves before we get there. Miles didn't answer right away. Then he said, I've got a son, 17, hates everything I do, thinks I'm a machine. Keanu turned to him gently. He doesn't hate you. He misses the parts of you buried to build your empire. Miles nodded slowly, his jaw tight. You think it's too late? Not if you start now, Keanu said. They shook hands, not out of business habit, but something deeper, like a man thanking another for helping him remember his own soul. That night, back in his hotel, Keanu sat by the window, guitar on his lap. He strummed a quiet tune, one he had written years ago but never finished. It had no lyrics, just a sound that reminded him of walking home barefoot on warm pavement after a long day. He played it slowly, letting each note breathe. As he played, his phone buzzed. It was a message. From Lena Chomaya's mom still lives in Nevada. I'm flying to see her tomorrow. Thank you. Another message came. From Hunter Grayson. I finally listened to her voicemail. Thank you. Another. From Simon. We're launching the Reeves Initiative. Purpose over profit. You lit the match. Keanu smiled. He didn't need applause. He didn't need a headline. He just needed this. A quiet ripple becoming a wave. Outside, the city kept moving, but something had shifted in its rhythm. And in a room once built to celebrate power, something greater had bloomed. Humility. The moment the numbers couldn't measure, the third and final day of the Golden Summit arrived under a heavy morning fog, wrapping the glass tower in a blanket of gray. Yet inside the building, something had never been clearer. Gone were the stiff smiles, the performative greetings, the strategic photo ops. Instead, people stood closer, listened longer, and spoke less of their stock options and more of their stories. By now, everyone knew Keanu was staying in a modest hotel near the harbor, not the luxury suites arranged for speakers. He had no team, no assistant, no security. And yet, his influence had silently upended the pecking order of the richest room in the world. Not by power, but by presence. In a small lounge on the 32nd floor, Lena Cho was deep in conversation with a group of young entrepreneurs. On the table in front of them were crumpled napkins covered in ink sketches and notes. Not business models, but community models. How to build access. How to restore dignity to systems that were designed to exclude. This is the first time, Lena said softly. I'm not building for shareholders, I'm building for Maya. They all nodded. In another part of the building, Hunter Grayson was doing something no one had ever seen him do before. He was listening, truly listening. Not nodding out of politeness, not scanning for weakness, just absorbing the words of a young activist named Delilah, who had been invited last minute by a quiet board member who believed the summit needed more heart. You built an empire, Delilah told Hunter. But for who? The people at the bottom of your chain are invisible to you, and until you see them, your empire will always stand on broken backs. Hunter didn't argue. He didn't dismiss. He didn't smirk. Instead, he said, "You're right, and I'm ready to rebuild it right." By mid-afternoon, the summit had become something it had never been before, a place of reflection. No press releases were sent, no bold declarations were made, but real decisions were happening in real time. Then came the unexpected moment that no one had planned. Keanu walked back into the building. No badge, no announcement. He simply stepped through the glass doors holding a brown paper bag that carried 2 books, both worn, both with handwritten notes in the margins. He walked up to the main stage, where a scheduled panel on blockchain had just ended, and quietly asked if he could borrow the microphone for a few minutes. The moderator hesitated, but the crowd, they stood. He was welcomed like a returning lighthouse in a storm. Keanu took the mic, gently placed the 2 books on the podium, and looked out across the faces that now held softness, not skepticism. "I don't have a presentation," he began, "but I have something more important." He lifted the first book. This belonged to a man named Thomas. He was homeless for 17 years. I met him outside a bookstore in New York. He taught me more about love than any script I ever read. He opened to a page, read a passage, and paused. He told me that being ignored is worse than being hated. At least hate acknowledges your existence. The room held its breath. He lifted the second book. This one belonged to a nurse who worked 3 shifts and still found time to hold strangers' hands in their final moments. She believed that dying with someone beside you is the last gift life offers. His voice cracked slightly, not for effect, for truth. She was my mother. A long silence stretched across the room. Both of these people, Keanu continued, had no stocks, no legacy, no seat at this summit. But they had something you can't buy: presence. They showed up for others. And maybe that's the most important currency we've forgotten. He looked around slowly. You're all building tomorrow. But if tomorrow comes and there's no kindness in it, what have we done? The silence turned into stillness. A holy stillness. A moment the billionaires in the room would replay for the rest of their lives. Then something astonishing happened. A young woman in the back raised her hand. Can we just talk?" she asked. "No panels, no titles, just people?" Keanu smiled. "That's all I've ever wanted." And so the summit's final session became a circle, not a hierarchy. The chairs were rearranged, nameplates removed, and in that room, the richest and the rising sat side by side, telling stories, asking questions, admitting fears, dreaming differently. Hunter spoke about the loneliness of always being the smartest man in the room and how it had cost him his marriage. Lena shared that she hadn't hugged her father in 6 years because they fought over her abandoning her medical oath for fame. Miles Drexler admitted he didn't know his son's favorite color. And Keanu? He sat quietly, listening, not needing to be the center, just helping others find their way to it. When the session ended, no one clapped. They embraced. One by one, each person left that room lighter, not because their problems vanished, but because they had finally stopped pretending they didn't carry. Keanu walked down the tower steps alone. He stepped out into the late evening mist. No cameras, no security, just him. A voice called after him. It was Lena. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Home," he said. "Will you come back next year?" she asked. Keanu smiled, the kind of smile that said more than any headline ever could. Only if you remember who you are between now and then. The summit that never ended. Weeks passed. Then months. The Golden Summit faded from headlines as quickly as it had appeared. The world, as always, moved on, chasing new stories, new trends, new distractions. But something strange began to happen. beneath the surface. A quiet kind of revolution. Not the loud, flag-waving kind, but the soft kind. The real kind. The kind that begins in boardrooms, in bedrooms, in broken hearts that suddenly remember how to feel again. Keanu Reeves had long returned to his quiet life. No interviews, no press tours. He never once mentioned the summit again. He didn't need to, because he didn't go there to be remembered. He went so others could remember themselves. What no one expected was how deeply he had changed the people who listened. Hunter Grayson was the first to act. 6 months after the summit, he dissolved 2 of his most controversial companies, ones that harvested data in unethical ways. His shareholders were furious. His board called him insane. He didn't flinch. Instead, he launched something new, something no one saw coming. It was called People First, a foundation that invested in companies led by former foster children, war veterans, single mothers, and ex-convicts trying to start over. "If we don't believe in people," he told a journalist, "then what's the point of any of this?" The journalist asked what changed him. Hunter simply replied, "A question, and a man who wasn't afraid to ask it." Lena Cho followed. She flew to Nevada and spent days with Maya's mother, apologizing, grieving, listening. Then she launched a branch of her biotech company called Maya's Path, dedicated to personalized medicine for rare disorders. It was non-profit, not a single dollar of profit, but it saved lives, and in that, Lena found something more valuable than any IPO. She found peace. Miles Drexler did something even more unthinkable. He stepped down. His son, the one who used to call him a machine, now called him every night. They went fishing. They talked about books. They laughed. Miles left his company not to escape power, but to reclaim something far greater: fatherhood. And then there was Simon. Young, passionate Simon, who turned his startup into a full-blown movement. The Reeves initiative exploded in growth. Instead of raising capital from venture giants, Simon opened a public fund where ordinary people could invest as little as $5 to back projects rooted in kindness and impact. "We're not just building companies," he said in his first public address. "We're rebuilding the soul of business." The initiative created schools in underserved areas, rebuilt homes for veterans, trained ex-convicts in coding, helped build clean water systems in neglected towns. When asked why he named it after Keanu, Simon smiled and said, "Because he reminded us that being human is the most powerful innovation of all." The movement spread, and slowly, like ripples that became waves, the story of what happened in that summit room reached places it was never meant to reach. Villages in India, classrooms in rural America, refugee camps in the Middle East. People began to believe again, not in systems, but in souls. Not in profit, but in purpose. A year later, the next Golden Summit was announced. But this time, it wasn't hosted in a glass tower or a luxury resort. It was held in a public park in Colorado. No suits, no badges, no VIP lounges, just a circle of people, some rich, some poor, some famous, most not. They sat beneath the open sky and spoke of loss, of hope, of dreams worth chasing not for status, but for service. Keanu wasn't on the list. But late in the day, as the sun began to dip behind the mountains, a figure approached the circle from the tree line. He wore the same old black hoodie, same jeans, same smile. He didn't take center stage. He sat on the grass, cross-legged like everyone else, and listened. Then, when it was his turn to speak, he said only one thing: "Don't let what you build make you forget who you are." The group nodded, not out of admiration, but because they knew now. They understood. Because once a man walked into a room of billionaires, not to compete, not to conquer, not to impress, but to remind them that beneath the weight of wealth, every heart still beats the same, and that summit, though it ended on paper, never truly ended. It lived on in boardrooms that now had empathy, in products designed with dignity, in homes where fathers and sons finally spoke again, in 1,000 small acts of courage sparked by one man's quiet truth, in a world obsessed With power, Keanu Reeves had left behind something more powerful than all the money in that tower. He left behind a mirror, and those who were brave enough to look into it were never the same again.